Hey runners, before we get into today's episode, I want to ask you a quick question. Have you ever wondered if your nutrition is actually helping your running or is it actually holding you back? If you want to find out, I've created a brand new free resource just for you. It's called the Runner's Fueling Audit. It's a super quick checklist that's going to help you spot the signs of underfueling, low energy availability, or where the gaps in your nutrition might be that are impacting your recovery and actually slowing you down. It only takes a few minutes to go through, and by the end, you're going to know whether or not your fueling is on the right track, or if you really need to start making some changes to the way you approach your eating so you can start to feel stronger on every run, reduce your injury risk, and actually get the results that you're training so hard for. You can grab your free copy right now by clicking on the link in the show notes. Again, this is called the Runner's Fueling Audit. It's a free downloadable resource, and it's going to give you so much clarity on how you can start feeling smarter and running stronger. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Hello. Welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where we are diving into something that maybe isn't a consideration for you right this very minute, but unfortunately for many of us will be soon. And that is how to run in the cold. Now, I am recording this episode for you. It is a absolutely gorgeous Monday in September. And I'm looking right now and it is a full on 26 degrees Celsius outside right now. I have no idea what that is in Fahrenheit. So I apologize to my US listeners for not having a conversion handy for you. That is one that I do not know off the top of my head. However, it is absolutely beautiful outside. So it's really unfortunate that I need to be sitting here and talking about this, how to run in the cold, but it will not be long, especially here in the province of Manitoba, where we are world renowned for our both severity and duration of our winter months, to be talking about how to run in the cold. And I think this is important because we talk a lot, and I dare say complain a lot sometimes about running in the heat. And of course, as a running coach, one of the most frequent messages and pieces of feedback and things that I get from my clients when I'm checking in on their run data and how they felt and how it went and all that. You know, the number one thing of, the heat was a killer today. The heat, right? So we spend a lot of time talking about the heat, how to adapt to the heat, maybe even encouraging runners to sort of lean into the benefits of running in the heat and all of that. And there will be, I will be doing a how to run in the heat episode coming up, not as we, of course, head into colder weather. This is a little bit more relevant. But what I think we sometimes don't talk about is how to run in the cold. And it's equally as important because it can be, I would say, equally, if not more dangerous if we do it poorly. There are significant risks to our health and well-being if we do a bad job of running in the cold. And there's also some ways that we can make running in the cold a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more enjoyable. And also, I want to give some of my sort of personal advice and kind of personal thoughts on how to successfully train through the winter months if you do have a goal race that's taking place in the winter or early in the springtime, and you live somewhere like I do here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, where winter can just be, it can be nuts. I mean, some years we have fairly mild winters. There's not a lot of snow. The sidewalk and path conditions are pretty good, and you can get out there and have good grip, and it's fairly safe. Other years, I don't know if any of you listening from Winnipeg remember the winter of 2022. I mean, it was to the point where we had so much snow. I think they just stopped even trying to clear the sidewalks and the running paths. Like, you could try to go for a quote unquote run, but you were just trudging through the deep snow. Like you couldn't get out there. If you had a workout planned where you had a specific like goal pace, you're trying to go there for a tempo run or something, like you just can't do it. And so how do we kind of navigate that in the winter months if we do want to get the quality training in and find that balance of maybe being someone who really does like running outside in the winter, but figuring out how we can still make our race day goals come to fruition. So, how to run in the cold. The first thing I want to talk about a little bit is why running in the cold can be challenging. Now, it's not necessarily that it always feels challenging, right? When we go from really, really hot, humid, that type of oppressive feeling weather where, your effort level is through the roof. You just can't seem to hit those harder, faster paces. You're instantly dehydrated. It's so hard to keep hydrated when you get out there and are trying to run. And it's just, it can be really tough to, again, have good quality training in those kinds of conditions. So as soon as it cools off, now all of a sudden, breath of fresh air and it's cool. I feel so good. I feel so strong. I don't have to bring, liters and liters of water with me on every single run. I can, make it with just my handheld and get to the end and I'm not dying of dehydration. So it feels really nice to a point. But then we start to go from cool weather, moderate weather, to cold weather. Now, depending on where you live and what you're used to, cold is a very relative term. And I understand that, So if you are listening and tuning in from a place like Florida or maybe Texas or California or I don't know, maybe Mexico, somewhere where, certainly your winter conditions and winter weather is not as extreme as what we experience in the north and in the prairies, it's all relative, right? So once we go from nice, cool, optimal performance weather to cold, there is a unique set of challenges here. And I want you to be aware of that, even if what I consider cold is different or a level of cold that you might have never even experienced in your life. Again, depending on where you're tuning in here from. So the first thing is that in colder conditions, in colder weather, your muscles take longer to warm up. And so this can be a risk for injuries, especially at the beginning of a run or the beginning of a workout, is that we're more at risk of pulling a muscle, straining, spraining, things like that, because we have less range of motion and more stiffness in our muscles, in our connective tissues, and in our joints when we initially set out to run. So what's really important here is that we are emphasizing that pre-run warm-up more so than maybe we would need to in warmer conditions. The other thing is that when the air gets colder, that means that the air is also drier. And so as we go from like hot and more humid conditions where there's more moisture in the air, as that air gets colder, we no longer have that same amount of water or moisture in the air. So the air gets a lot drier, and that dry air can irritate our lungs and can make breathing feel harder, especially if we're working hard outside and we're taking in a deep breath of that really cold, really dry winter air. Then this can really impact our breathing and can even cause some irritation in the lungs. Another important consideration why cold weather running can feel more challenging is because we also have to put more energy into keeping our body warm. And so just like on the flip side, the other end of the extreme, running in the heat, the body has to work harder to stay cool. In very cold conditions, it means that we have more energy being diverted for regulating our body temperature, keeping us warm enough. Now, of course, when we're exercising, we are generating heat, which is a good thing and helps to keep us warm. But depending on how cold we're talking about, we may also be diverting some of that energy to helping to keep us from our body temperature dropping too low, of course, which is not a good thing. Of course, as I kind of mentioned earlier in the episode, the conditions that we're running in, the environmental conditions, whether that's snow, ice, maybe it's going to be slippery if there's rain, things like that, are going to impact our ability to get our footing, risks for slipping and falling, and even our risks for injury of just trying to go fast on a slippery or uneven surface, right? I mean, if you know, if you know that you've been there trying to run fast on ice, trying to run fast on uneven, uncertain conditions where there's a layer of ice and then a layer of snow and then a layer of ice and a layer of snow, and it's just an absolute mess out there. This is going to change your stride. And it's going to force you to slow down a little bit, which isn't inherently a bad thing if you're someone who does tend to go out too fast a lot of the time. These conditions might make you have to take it easy and have to slow down a little bit and be more mindful, which can be good for building that aerobic base. But again, if you've got a specific workout planned that you're trying to do or needing to do as part of your training program, being on a surface that makes that impossible or nearly impossible can really impact the overall training that you're getting in and make it hard to actually reach your goals. I remember when I run outside in the wintertime intermittently. I am not, despite being a Winnipegger and being from, the winter capital of the world or whatever name it is that they've given us, I am not someone who enjoys cold weather particularly, not someone who enjoys being out there in cold weather. I am trying. I've made some good progress in that realm over the past number of years. But even still, I don't dislike the treadmill. I am perfectly fine with a good treadmill run. But in some winters where it's been a little bit more mild out, there isn't a ton of snow, the sidewalk or path conditions are pretty clear, pretty dry. You can get out there and still do okay. One thing I did notice was that if I was running on, some snow, ice, etc., then it really did change my stride to the point where I was noticing like some discomfort in some different areas. And not an injury, but just you recognize that you're utilizing different muscles in different ways. And it's just kind of an interesting observation. What I also found when I was pregnant and getting to the end of my running journey during my pregnancy, it was getting into middle of fall time. My twins were born in November, and starting to snow. We were starting to get in some winter weather a few weeks before that, and just noticing getting some ice and some snow on the ground and stuff like that, needing to be really mindful with footing and everything, plus the extra weight and imbalance of a pregnancy definitely made it impossible for me to be out running. Like I had to switch to walking for those last couple of weeks outside because there was just no way that I was, safe to be doing that and probably wouldn't have been smart to take the risk. So definitely something to be aware of. And again, if we're trying to reach a certain gear with our effort level or reach a certain goal pace or something for a time, that can be more challenging and might be a consideration for maybe taking your workout indoors. The other big thing that I find, and I don't know if this is part just the nature of living in a place where we do have long, dark, cold winters, or if it's that for a lot of runners, this is our off season where we don't have a race on the calendar. We've just kind of finished up a season of spring, summer, fall events, and we're heading into less consistent training, less consistent racing and things. I don't really know, but certainly motivation can take a hit, right? It's a lot easier to get up and go for a run when it's a beautiful 20 degrees Celsius outside. You can just put on your shorts and your t-shirt and head out the door and enjoy yourself. And the sun is up and the birds are chirping and, what a wonderful time. In the winter, it's dark. It's dark when you start your run. It's probably still dark when you end your run. It's cold. It takes you as long to get bundled up and put on all your layers as it does to actually do the run. It's adding on a lot of time. And, we also are fighting maybe more wind. You're out there and you don't have a race on the calendar. You're just trying to maintain your base mileage and it's kind of feeling a bit blah, whatever. Motivation can definitely be a tough thing to get through during the winter months and during that really cold weather. So when the weather goes from hot to cool, it can feel kind of refreshing at first. And everyone's like, oh yeah, finally fall is here. We very quickly go from fall to winter. And it just can add an extra layer of, stress and challenge and complexity. So I kind of touched a little bit, talking about the challenges of winter running. Also talking a little bit about the dangers of maybe not adjusting for cold weather, right? The running in colder temperatures can feel easier compared to the effort level that's required to run in the heat. However, ignoring and trying to just kind of push through the conditions that you're running in can still pose some risks. As I mentioned, injury risk, right? If you start out too fast, if you skip or skimp on your warm-up, cold muscles are much more prone to injury than warm muscles and warm joints. So you're much more likely to get hurt if you're going out there and just heading out the door and starting off your run without any kind of warm-up. The second thing, of course, is going to be slips and falls, overstriding, or trying to maintain fast paces can increase your risk of losing your traction. And of course, there are grips that you can purchase. There are things that you can do with your shoes. You can insert little drywall screws into the soles of your shoes in order to give yourself a little bit more traction. So there's lots of ways that we can kind of circumvent that and reduce that risk, but it's just something to be aware of. And if you're running in really windy or really damp conditions, if you're underdressed or overdressed, not really prepared for the cold, then you are increasing your risk of frostbite or even hypothermia, which sounds crazy, right? You're out there running, you're wearing too many layers, you're overbundled. But, right, when we start to produce that sweat or produce that heat, and then that sweat is what makes us cold, right? So now we're damp, and now that water is going to cool off, which is keeping us cold, but now it's keeping us too cold. So things can get really dangerous really quickly, especially in those really cold conditions, and if we're really far from home. And of course, if you have any kind of lung issues, breathing issues, things like that, then intense efforts in those really cold temperatures, again, that really dry, really cold air can impact your lungs and cause some issues with breathing. So it does require us to change our approach and just be mindful of being smart about getting out there and running in colder temperatures. So the first thing that we want to do is just make sure that we're doing a really good, thorough warm up before we head outside. So you want to do this ideally indoors. So indoors, before you go out for your run, you are going to spend a good at least 5, even 10 minutes warming up, right? Start off slow, ease into the effort, ease into the range of motion, doing some of those dynamic movements. Again, small range of motion, moving into a bigger range of motion, taking your time to do a very thorough warm up before you head out the door. The second thing we want to do is make sure that we're dressing smart for the conditions. Generally speaking, it is a good rule of thumb to dress as if it's about 10 degrees warmer than it actually is. This is to account for the increase in body temperature and the increase in the feeling of warmth that you're going to get when you start exercising. So when you start running, you're producing heat, of course. And so some of that heat, we want to make sure that we're not over bundling and then we're overheating and sweating too much, which then is going to impact our risk for something like hypothermia. So we want to dress in layers. We want to have that base layer, which is made of a moisture wicking fabric, which is going to keep the sweat off of our skin. So that base layer, and depending on the exact temperature, how cold it actually is, we might want to do both a top and bottom base layer or just one or the other. It again depends on how cold it is and how cold it feels for you. And then we want to have potentially in quite cold weather, a middle layer. So a middle layer that's going to be sort of a fleecy layer for insulation, right? So that's going to help to keep that warmth in. So we want the moisture wicking layer that's going to keep the actual dampness and the sweat off of our skin. But then we want that insulation layer that's going to actually keep some of that heat inside so we don't get too cold. And then we want to have an outer layer that's going to be wind and water resistant. So you're imagining like a windbreaker layer, a jacket that's going to protect you against the wind and the rain to kind of keep all of that off of you. And that's how we sort of layer ourselves for dressing in the colder weather. Now, again, depending on, maybe you're fine if it's not windy outside or it's not snowing or raining outside. You might be fine in, say, like a base layer and then a fleece on top. Or for me, depending on the temperatures, I sometimes will just like to run in my base layer and then my running jacket. My running jacket actually has a fleecy, it's an Under Armour cold gear jacket. And it's got like a fleecy insulated layer on the inside of the jacket. And so down to some pretty cold temperatures, I find that I'm like, pretty perfect in terms of temperature and comfort level with just a base layer and that jacket. The nice thing too is that I don't feel really heavy or really like overly bundled with stuff. And it just makes for like a nicer, smoother running experience. But again, this is going to be really dependent on what you have for gear and of course the exact conditions that you're going to be running in. One little tip that I have, one suggestion that I have is to keep notes of all of this stuff, right? Season to season, year to year, right? We go a long time, fortunately. We go quite a few months of the year without needing to worry about this stuff. best of times, we've got a good 5, maybe 6 months that we don't have to be thinking about this and worrying about this. Sometimes we forget, we can forget, what was I wearing last year that worked really well for when it was like this and that outside, or what was the combination of things that I had? What base layer did I like better? Keeping a little running journal of all of these notes to say, on this run, it was these conditions, this wind, speed, this temperature, and I wore this, and this, it was great. Or I wore this, and this, I was too hot. This, and this, I was too cold. So that you can go back and you kind of know and start to get a sense of like what works and what your kind of go-to outfits are. And another thing I will say is that, it does make sense here a lot of times to invest in some good quality stuff. There's a few reasons for it. One, better quality gear is going to be lighter weight. It's going to use better quality fabrics and technical fabrics that are going to do a better job of what they need to do, again, with less bulk and less weight. So whether that's moisture wicking for a base layer, whether that's going to be insulation or a lighter outer layer, whatever it might be, you're going to get just better function out of a lot of those products if you invest in good quality stuff. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be the most expensive thing on the market, far from it. But read reviews, see what other people are recommending. The secondhand market for a lot of this stuff is really good too, because how many people take up a sport and then never end up doing much with it and end up donating all their clothes and selling all their gear because they never really used it. And things used for other sports like skiing, for example. Here we've got a big cross-country skiing community. Some of that stuff is great because, it's been tried, tested, and true by people who are doing another sport. The other thing we want to remember is to protect our extremities. So this is keeping your hands warm, your ears warm, your feet warm, and even the rest of your face and your neck warm. Again, to make sure that you're not putting yourself at risk of frostbite. And if you have something covering your face, so that might be like a face mask or a scarf or a balaclava, to actually help warm the air before you're breathing it in. So it can be a little bit uncomfortable if you're not used to it, but it's great for actually helping to get the air that's going into your lungs warmed up a little bit, so it isn't quite so cold and quite so dry. The other thing that's important to remember is that we have to prioritize and think about effort over pace, especially in really cold or really challenging footing conditions. If there's a lot of snow, a lot of ice, the extra clothing and gear you might have on might be really heavy, right? Adding a couple of pounds at least to what you're carrying with you. So your effort might also be higher from just the extra weight that you're carrying from adding in all of this extra gear. So on these really icy, really snowy, or really windy days, definitely be slowing down and adjusting your pace to, stay in the correct effort zone. And there might be a time that you decide that you want to swap to an indoor workout or cross training. It's also really important to hydrate. I know this doesn't seem, we talk so much about how you have to hydrate in the heat, hydrate in the heat, hydrate in the heat. You're thinking, Steph, at least when it's cold outside, I get a break, right? You're going to cut me a break from needing to hydrate and obsess about drinking enough. No, I'm not. You still lose sweat and you still are going to be, losing those fluids even in the cold, especially when the air is really dry in the winter. And if you do happen to be, a little bit more bundled up, it's surprising how much you can sweat underneath those layers of clothing, right? So dressing appropriately and kind of layering right is important, because if we are over bundled, we can end up sweating too much and we can actually become more dehydrated than we even think because of all those extra layers, keeping all of that heat in, which then is going to increase our sweat rate. So just be mindful that it is really important to continue to think about hydration and be hydrated, have a plan for hydration, especially if you're going out running for a long period of time in the cold. And winter running often means running in the dark. So making sure that you're wearing gear that is reflective, wearing a headlamp so that you can see where you're going. We don't want to have, I tripped and fell on the sidewalk because it was pitch black outside in my neighborhood and I didn't see that there was a big crack or a big lift in the sidewalk, just little things like that. Of course, you want to be visible to other people out on the path or on the road. You also want to be visible to cars. So being safe and thinking about some of these things that are very different from summer to winter is really important. So making sure that we are visible, not only to others, but that we can also see, and that the things in front of us that we need to see are visible. And so I want to wrap it up today. I want to wrap up our conversation today with talking about, when do you need a backup plan? And this came up actually just last week in a call that I had with a client about training over the winter. And of course, I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, so I work with lots and lots of runners who run outside all winter long in some conditions that honestly are pretty mind-boggling to me. And I applaud all of you. And I've said that on the podcast before. If you're someone who is very dedicated to running outside all winter long, I mean, you get a huge pat on the back and congratulations for me, because I'm just not that girl. But anyway, so I was talking this with a specific client about how she really loves to run outside in the winter, and she likes to get out all year round. But of course, then she did, sort of follow that up with, there was a certain temperature threshold, and I can't remember exactly what hers was, but of course it's going to be different for everybody. But there was a certain temperature threshold that she would typically either cut her run short. So say, I'll just kind of throw an example. Maybe if it's like -30 outside with the wind chill, she's not going to go out for longer than half an hour, right? So even if her training plan was a longer run, in those conditions, she would typically run just a maximum of 30 minutes. And then, of course, if it's even colder, maybe she was considering not going out at all. But I think she was someone who would go out, but just maybe go out for half an hour, even if it was pretty darn cold outside. And so we were just talking about, consistency with training and goals with training, and kind of how all that plays out. And what I see sometimes is people who do prefer running outside in the winter, and that is great. Some people who are adamant that they will not run inside ever at all. That's also fine, right? Depending on where you live and how extreme the winter weather gets, and what your goals are with your running for this stretch of time over the winter, and when your race is, and all of those things, I do encourage a lot of you to have a backup plan for when we get these like really crazy polar vortex stretches, or if you live in a place that you're often getting really huge dumps of snow that make it hard to follow your training plan. I had a runner, a client. She was on a podcast episode earlier this year, and she talked about her experience with having to do a lot of her long runs, more long runs than I think she anticipated, training for her marathon in the spring inside on the treadmill. That particular year where she lives, they just got so much snow, and be days before a lot of the sidewalks and running paths and things like that were cleared. And so there was just no way that she was going to be able to get out and do a lot of her runs outside just because of those conditions. So it was either don't do the run, which isn't always a good option, right? If it's happening pretty frequently, or, you're doing this long run on the treadmill. And it was, I think, a huge area of mental growth for her to have that opportunity and to do all those long runs inside. But yeah, so, if you're often getting really extremely cold weather or really bad snow, and it just makes it hard to follow your training plan, but you're in a training cycle, with an early, a winter or an early spring race that you have a goal for, that, you really need to be following this training plan as much as humanly possible. I do recommend having a backup plan, whether that's running on the treadmill or running somewhere that you have access to an indoor track. I love running on the indoor track. I used to do so many workouts, long runs, you name it, on the indoor track when I had a gym membership. We had a fantastic, wonderful facility at one of the universities here in the city where I live, the University of Manitoba. They built a new fitness center. Fitness center probably over a decade old now, but it still feels new to me. And they had this beautiful big indoor track that went around and around the fitness center. And I don't know, it was just so entertaining. Like, you'd just be like running, doing your long run, listening to your music, watching the people come and go. Everyone's doing their workouts. And I don't know, I just really loved it. So something like that. Or yes, of course, the treadmill is an option too. And I've got one at home and I use it regularly throughout the winter. But I just think it's great to have a backup plan if it's important that you are sticking to and following your training plan so that you can reach a goal for a specific race. If you don't have that pressure, if you are in a base building season, if you're in an off season, if you don't have a race on the calendar, then you don't necessarily need to have a backup plan, right? You can adjust, you can take an extra rest day or two, you can go for a walk instead of a run. Maybe you go skiing or snowshoeing or skating or do some kind of other outdoor winter sport or activity that you can do no matter what the temperatures or conditions are. It doesn't always have to be a run, and it doesn't always have to be the run that's on your training plan. If at that particular stage of life for you, you don't need to be following a training plan that religiously. So there's no right or wrong answer here, but I just want to kind of lay that out because for the client that I was talking about initially, it was a little bit of a light bulb moment for her of like, oh yeah, like you can switch it up, right? You can keep it flexible. You don't have to only run outside or only not, or you can, go down to the indoor track or do something different if this is a key workout for you. If this is a key distance or pace or something that you're trying to hit with this specific run, that's fine too. So there's no right or wrong answer, but if you find that over the winter you're often not getting in the miles that you need to in order to reach your goals, if you're not getting in key workouts because of the road conditions, you look back at your training plan and you're like, oh man, I was like maybe 50% of what was on my plan last year. That might be holding you back from reaching your goals. And so it's okay to run inside if it means that you're either avoiding frostbite or maybe hitting those goal paces or distances that you need to. So thank you so much for listening today. Thank you so much for tuning in. That is it for today's episode on how to run in the cold. I hope that you found it helpful. And if you are ready to take the next step with me in fueling smarter and running stronger, I want to tell you a little bit more about a brand new resource that I have just released just for you. And it's my Fuel Smarter, Run Stronger ebook. So what I've done is I've taken all of my knowledge, all of my expertise, everything about fueling smarter, every step of the process, your pre-run nutrition, your intra-run nutrition, your post-run nutrition, what to eat when, how to address your relationship with food, your mindset around food, all the things that I think you need to know as a runner to get started on that path to better fueling strategies. Put it all into this wonderful ebook, this wonderful resource. In it, you're going to find all of my best tips, strategies, as well as an entire bonus collection of meal ideas and recipes, literally dozens of meal ideas and recipes, everything you need to fuel your training with confidence without the guesswork. So you can grab your copy today at the link in the show notes. This ebook is currently only $27. So I can't wait for you to check it out, dive in, and start putting all of these tools and resources into practice. All right, that is it for this week's episode. Again, I want to thank you so much for checking it out, spending some time with me today, and we will catch you right back here for next week's episode. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.